getting onto schools, to education, are you disturbed by the fact that we put in an enormous amount and we've increased the amount of money that goes into education, yet the standards measured internationally, the standards in the essential subjects, in literacy, in numeracy, and in science, all those standards are falling in comparison with other countries? And
this goes into what's in the curriculum. This goes to what children are being taught and the nonsense that is being fed in their brains. It's almost a negative nonsense. Like, kids have got to be told, firstly, they've got to be told forget we've got this terrible pandemic thing with all the issues of freedom there, but kids have generally got to be told what great opportunities in life that they have ahead of them. The first thing they need to be told is how much better off they are than their father and their grandfather and their great-grandfather, and how much more opportunities that they had, and how much longer their life expectancy is than was 100 years ago. None of that's taught in our schools. Our history is not taught. We're just taught that everything all these assets and wealth that we have today just came about and they were always there. That's the first thing that's got to be done. And the other one, you've got to undo the damage that Gillard did. Now, Gillard, when she was health minister under Rudd, did a thing called the Melbourne Declaration. And what she did, she put the concept of, she had 3 overriding themes, which was sustainability. So everything's got to do with climate change. Every subject is taught through the prism of climate change. So no longer do you do 2 + 2 = 4. There are 2 polar bears and the polar bears go extinct and there are no polar bears left. They'll go extinct because of climate change. It was indigenous to Australia, which is important to learn, but you don't embed it in every subject. And Asia, as though Asia is some sort of like just single entity without all the variations of the different cultures and things to try and think it's one entity. To embed all those across the curriculum, and rather than just learn about a particular subject on its own merits, I think former Prime Minister Gillard did enormous damage to our national curriculum. There's a clear, very strong leftist agenda and leftist bent. I see some of these kids coming out of school, and honestly, I think you almost need to be deprogrammed. You've just been fed all this absolute nonsense, like of the Greta Thunberg ideal of the world, that we're all going to burn in a fiery hell and die unless you repent. It's almost like a quasi-religious belief that they've had fed into their heads, and you can see it's affecting their entire life. A lot of these kids come and say, I don't want to have kids because the world's going to go to hell in a handbasket. hang on. Oh, I'm worried about my kids. The world will burn. Hang on a minute. A child born today is like to have a life expectancy double what it was 100 years ago.
But surely any government, state and the federal government has got involved in education. It's not part of its constitutional remit, but it's got involved in education. But any of them that preside over this, even briefly, are failing. It's their biggest failure, apart from defence. It's their biggest failure, I would think. And any government that presides over a system where money is going into education and the standards are falling is a failure. Yeah.
Well, I've been very critical of the government, probably as much as anyone on the opposition side of me, but I'll give Alan Tudge as the Education Minister. He's made a lot of good noises in this space. I think Alan's a good bloke, and more power to him, but he's got to make sure he's got 100% support behind the rest of the party to try and wind this toxic leftist, defeatist agenda that is being fed into our kids in the schools, because it is absolutely toxic and is doing our kids enormous damage.
Is part of the problem the fact that the Commonwealth has tried to get involved? The Commonwealth can't, in my opinion, the Commonwealth doesn't fulfil its primary functions properly.
Well, remember, it was the Commonwealth getting involved. It was Gillard as the Julia Gillard as the Education Minister getting involved in this, that put in these sort of called Melbourne Declaration of these national standards, of these national curriculums. You're probably right. They'd probably be far better to be much more decentralised and give parents the choice. So you can see what curriculum do they offer, what's being done, and let parents choose and have some much more competitive pressure amongst the different areas of the states.
The argument that parents should have a warrant and they should have a warrant equivalent to, warrant is one word, I can't think of the other word, but the idea is that...
A voucher,
yes, which would be the average cost of education in a state school, and take it if they want to another school. They can go to one of these small private schools, independent schools, which are developing. And
I call the charter school movement. They're called in the US.
Yes.
But you're probably right. Even though Alan Tudge is trying to do a very good job as minister, the change of government, you could get another hardcore left-wing minister in that sort of doubles down on what's already there.
Yes, and you could under a state coalition government, you could get hard left-wing ministers, as we've seen.
Fancy that! Who would have thought that would have happened?
This is the extraordinary thing that's happened to Menzies' party.
Oh, look! If the reality is, there's many people that are in the Liberal Party today that seriously belong in the Greens Party. And they've been able not only to get into the party, they've gotten elected to Parliament and get into the ministry. And this is why, I think political parties probably have a certain lifespan where they need regeneration and a complete thing. And if we look back through history, remember the United Australia Party came about through the lack of strength on the conservative side of politics back in the 1930s. Then they were taken over and merged into the Liberal Party, right? And now we're almost as though history is almost repeating as we're setting up the United Australia Party, which I think we're getting people from both sides of politics, Liberal, and we've got people from the Greens, former Greens Party, that were actually true Greens that believed in the environment and looking after yourself and your fitness, your health body. Greens people are joining us. So I think that you almost need the complete shake-up of the Liberal Party for what's happened to them, because they are no longer represent. As I said, you go to the main page, what we believe in the Liberal Party, you read through that and then look at the policies that they're putting in. Chalk and cheese. They no longer stand for what they say they believe in.
Could we just go briefly to defence? I think we now have a real Minister for Defence in Peter Dutton. Yes. I think he's made some significant decisions. But the parties have failed very much in defence. I mean, they've spent, I think, 4 decades on submarines, and submarines have been a disaster. The Collins class, to start off with, then the contract with the French submarines, and the idea that we're going to wait till 2040.
Well, it's 2060 or 20, yes. But the other ones were 2060 or 2070 or something.
And the idea that you use the defence power to also build up an industry and save your seats is not a very wise...
And also have all these social goals that you are trying to achieve. The first thing you have to do is make sure the purpose of the defence force is to defend the nation, full stop. Right? Not, we have to make sure they oblige for all these social programs and equal opportunity things, and we have to get gender quotas and things like that, and we've got to make sure that the fences. The Vice President of the USA talking about she wants to make sure the defence has all solar panels
on their tanks.
On the tanks, and one of the British generals talked about it. I have solar panel tanks, and one of the greatest threats to the superiority of the Western Defence Alliance is this idea of this political correctness, this utopian net zero thing that we're going to do and apply to our military. That is one of the greatest threats that we have. We've got to say the job of defence is to defend the nation, and that at times requires to kill people. What's the old expression? We sleep safely in our beds at night because rough men are prepared to do violence upon those that would hurt us. That's your defence force, right? But we've thrown those. That's what you said. The previous submarine deal wasn't about the defence of the nation. It was about a jobs creation scheme and shoring up marginal Liberal Party seats for the next election.
Yes, and then we've damaged, I think, the morale of the soldiers.
That's right.
By the ridiculous policies in relation to going back and trying to see what should have been dealt with at the time, if there were problems, and a hostile media which seems to be determined to get the army.
We send these guys over to Afghanistan to fight a war. They're wandering around sort of tribal lands. You don't know who's friends, you don't know who's foe. You've got IEDs buried in the ground you're likely to step on, or you like to run over one of the vehicles. the transport vehicles that they're on. You've got what the case where the people that they were training took the gun and shot the people that were Australian soldiers that were training them. That's the environment that you're operating in. And you've got all these sort of like Canberra-based lawyers, right, that have never had anyone sort of like fire a shot at them in anger, wanting to say, oh, you know, you people have committed all these crimes and we're going to find you guilty. And then you had the Prime Minister of the country basically declare their guilt before they even had a trial.
Yes. Brutal truths, he said. Brutal truths in the Brereton report.
You know, without these guys even having some type of fair hearing. Like, firstly, any of those hearings that you have, if you're going to sit in judgment on them, unless you've been under fire, unless you've had people firing at you and your life has been in danger, you've got no right to judge these people.
They've had this over them for years, the Brereton inquiry. A report's been handed down. Now it goes, it's been commented on as though all of it is to be believed. Now they've set up a system, another investigation to decide whether there should be prosecutions. Then it'll be sent to the DPP. We're talking about years. These men are going to have this over their heads for years and years and years.
One thing that we don't understand, I was fortunate enough to have a couple of days embedded with the commandos out at Holsworthy. And basically you're in the military camouflage, you do everything that they do. These guys almost killed me at the time, but that's another story. But I got to see how they worked and how they lived. And the thing I took away with it was that when we go back to World War II and World War I, it was all in. Everyone was in. Everyone you knew was fighting, or some family fighting. It was, it was truly we're all in this together, right? But when we have conflicts today, like whether it was especially Afghanistan and Iraq, it's this very small number of people that are going and fighting these wars, and basically, and the majority of society is completely isolated from them. And the distinction between the two lifestyles about where, all of a sudden you're fighting this war and you're in military camouflage and you're shooting people and there's death and destruction, your mates are dying, and then you jump on a plane and fly home and you're sitting at the suburban pub and everyone's watching the footy, and there's such a disconnect. There was never that disconnect in from like when you read history in previous wars. I think that's one of the reasons why I think we've got such great difficulty at reintegrating all these soldiers back into society. But when we've sort of like had this Brereton report and this is the truth and stuff, and all these people have been hung out to dry, this has really significant effects on the morale of our armed services, which is just as important as the munitions and weapons and equipment that we give them to go and fight with.
And in addition, I've read that the entry standards have been changed. They've been adjusted so that social policies can prevail, particularly in relation to combat troops. If you're going to have combat troops, they have to be strong.
Yeah. Well, they have to be able to pick the other if their mate's fallen over, or been shot in the leg or taken a bullet, you've got to be able to throw that person over your shoulder and carry them. That's what you've got to be able to do. And there's certain physical strength that you need for these jobs. And the idea that we're sort of going to try and, make it all socially acceptable and these things, this is, look, the communist Chinese and the Russians are probably sitting there laughing at us.
Are they laughing about that as much as they're laughing about our obsession with global warming? The people, the beneficiaries of global warming, of the policies that were adopted in Glasgow, are going to be
every single policy. You go through what the policies are. More subsidies for wind turbines and solar panels.
We buy
from China, right? Chinese are very clever, right? Very clever. They move the production out to use the cheap labour of the weakest, right? Let's keep the solar panels at a price that will dominate the market. We'll wipe out all the competition. So we send billions of dollars off to communist China to buy the solar panel. So that's okay, that's one tick. They're going, you beauty, is this a great plan to buy all these solar panels from us? Right? Then we're saying we can't use our own coal. The insanity of this, that in the Hunter Valley, we're going to build, so you've got the world's best coal, top-notch coal, sitting there, close to the ground. You don't need the deep underground mining like they have to go to in places like Germany. We used to go. Being like you're miles and miles underground, basically on the surface. Right? And we're going to build on top of that a gas-fired power station and import the gas in. And meanwhile, you've got a railway line, so that as they're building this gas-fired power, the construction workers can watch the coal trains go by, taking the world's best coal to the port for countries like China to use. This is insane. This is completely insanity.
And once the people are asked, are they willing to pay for all of these policies? They're not willing to pay. They might accept the idea because the media are telling them.
The reality is, even if you are the most ardent believer that the global temperatures can be controlled with CO2 like a control knob, even if you believe that, okay, if I can dial up good or bad weather by controlling the CO2. We produce Australia 1.2% of the global total. When we close industries down, that industry relocates to China. And the same goods are manufactured on a more carbon-intensive grid than our grid. So your actually CO2 emissions globally, which are what counts, go up. It's insane.
And all of the ones who are strongly pushing this and have very noble...
Oh, yeah. All seem to have big investments in that.
They don't do anything about the fact that the communists use slave labour and take away people's human rights in a savage way. None of that is issue, and we have these enormous financial interests who are very keen to have manufacturing done in China, particularly if slave labour is used because it's cheaper. Much cheaper.
Look, this is, again, the parallels between the global warming issue and the COVID issue, where it's centralised control, censorship, you'll do what you're told, you'll surrender your freedoms, you'll have a lower standard of living, all for the greater good.
Yes.
Is the parallels are uncanny.
Now, I just remembered a farmer asked me to ask you a question. Yes. When I wrote that book a few years ago called Give Us Back Our Country, there was a chapter in it called Why Do They Hate Our Farmers? Yes. Meaning the politicians, the political parties and the bureaucrats. But he wanted to know what your view is on the policy introduced by Mr. Turnbull when he was water minister, which was to separate the land from the water, right. Sure. And the water rights could then be sold on the international market.
So the rain falls on your land and it's in your dam, but you don't own it. Yeah. Like, come on.
What do you think of that? Would you reverse?
Well, yeah, we actually got a policy, working on a policy on that. Actually, we've cut an ad attacking that point. That's sort of in the vault, ready to go during the election campaign. It is just a nonsense that the farmers don't own the land. It's different if it's the river. If it's a major river, if it's a major river flowing through, which is not effective on their property. But when it's just the rain that falls on their land and they have a dam that's there, this is the idea. Remember, all these policies were done under dear old Malcolm with the ideology that the drought was permanent. That was the ideology that was done. The climate has changed and it'll never rain like it did before, and we have to have all these policies in to control the water because we're going to have less of it. I said, we've got more rain. I said, look, this was at the start of last 2 years ago, even we've had record rains. We've had more rain in the first 20 years of this century than we've had in the first 20 years of the last century. So the idea that the country is drying out is just BS. Right? It's the natural cycle that we've had since we've had records of land of drought and flooding rains. And I've got a great map in my office of Australia, which goes back every year, I think from 1900, and it shows the patterns of rain over and under rainfall, and you can see it: excess, deficit, excess. That's how we are. That's how it will always be.
Just one question. You're obviously opposed to a republic, but if we did become a republic, should we become a republic on a mix of American and Swiss principles?
Well, I always think this is look, it's up to those that argue for a republic. Which one do you want, fellas? Right? Tell us your model. Tell us your model. Let's argue. Do you want a Soviet socialist republic, or do you want the one like they have in North Korea, or would you like the Chinese republic? Which one is it? Show us your model, right? And let's debate. I think that we've been very fortunate to have the system of government that we have, and for all its flaws, I think as soon as you start, and so people say, oh, we don't want a politician as head of state, but as soon as you have a vote for it, we want a popular vote. As soon as you have a voting system, that becomes a political contest. The minute that you say someone is going to be the head of state and you vote for them, it's a political contest and that person becomes a politician.
That reminds me, one of the big problems that the Republicans have at the moment is that they announced this year that they would finally release their model. They'd kept their model secret.
Where's our friend Mr. Fitzsimons with the red bandana? He's had a lot of time to work on this. It has to be 20 years, hasn't it been? Or 22 years?
And they said they'd release it this year. What they were doing in the background was negotiating with the real Republicans who want to have a popular elected president. They're funded very much from Clem Jones' will. Yes. Clem Jones, who was the very wealthy Lord Mayor of Brisbane, left them a substantial amount of money. And they're trying to work with them. And the model I think they're trying to push is to have a popularly elected president, but without any reserve powers, with no purely ceremonial, having no influence or powers at all. And I don't think the real Republicans are swallowing that. And they're in a quandary now because they've announced a model. Right. We've only got a few days left for the end of the year.
I'm sure they can extend it. 22 years, there's just a bit more time to try and get it right. So
the interesting thing is when they dropped that policy of having two plebiscites, the first plebiscite you asked, what do you want in it?
Oh, that's right. Well, they tried to cheat, remember? This is how they said, just tell us, it's like sort of saying, would you like to go on a holiday, yes or no? And then we'll get you to the airport, then you'll work out where you're going. Now, you may be going to, was it Pyongyang for a fortnight, sort of thing? We might be sending you, but you don't know where you're going. I said, well, tell me where I'm going first, and then I'll vote for it.
The two Napoleons were very good at that, asking plebiscites, asking these questions, and then interpreting the question they wanted to. Good. It's been wonderful of you to give us so much time for Australia Calling. And in conclusion, can I ask you about the support you're getting? I noticed that there was a published poll in relation to the western suburbs, which showed a dramatic increase, much more than most minor parties, if I may call you a minor party. Most minor parties don't record those levels. And this was in a published
poll, fairly substantial size. It was 3 seats, 2 owned by the government, Banks and Lindsay, which the government holds both those by about a 5% margin, and Macquarie, which the Labor Party hold by a very small margin. Now, what that poll found, it had firstly 8.5% undecided that was taken out. So it had the Labor Party on 28%, the Liberal Party on 29%, the United Australia Party was on 17%. There was about 5% for the other minor parties, which are probably One Nation, Liberal Democrats. Now, effectively, you can add that vote to us. So with those two groups, that takes us to 22. We are within, we are within range of them, and that was back in October. And we've done a lot. Our polling has improved since then. And
do you do your own polling?
Yeah, we do our own internal polling.
How are you looking?
We're looking good. Every week we're gaining. We're getting strong.
You have an extraordinarily large party.
That's right. Well,
how many?
We're over 85,000 members. Now we have, I think the Labor and Liberal Party don't publish the number of members that they have. We believe it's in the 40 to 50,000. So when we got to 60,000, we thought we could claim that we're now the largest political party by membership. We're now 85, and I think the way we're going, early next year we'll have that up to 100,000. We've just finalising our pre-selections. We had 1,500 people nominate to run for us at the next federal election.
What's the quality?
Wait till you see the people, the quality that we have. It is almost humbling that these great candidates that we've got from all walks of life. A
friend of mine is a candidate. He's an former SAS.
That's it. Oh, yes, yeah. And this is, I think, what we need. We need almost
and heavily involved after he left the military in crisis management, and really serious crisis.
Well, this is what we need. We need, again, you go back to Joe Lyons' day and to Bob Menzies' day. The politicians had a lot of experience outside, so when they came to Parliament, they brought all this life experience with them. And you had people coming from all the countries and all different walks of life. And it made for a strong Parliament that you look at an idea and you had 150 minds looking at it from all different angles. Unfortunately, it's just the political system. You've got these career politicians that have done very little outside politics. This is the great advantage of our team. Well, it will be a team. We've got all 151 seats. We've got people from all backgrounds. We've got military people. We've got business people. We've got medical people. We've got doctors. We've got nurses. We've got school teachers. We've got policemen. We've got all people from all different industries, all different walks of life. We've got Indigenous people. We've got people that have come to with their Section 44 qualifications, right? So we've got people that represent almost all the different continents where their families have come from. We will have the best team, the most qualified, highly qualified team in the field at this election above the two major.
Will the preferential system work in your favour or against you?
No, I think it'll work in our favour. I think the preferential. I think there's an argument for optional preferential system. There's nothing worse than when you see when you're scrutineering, you see the people have ticked one for Kelly and they haven't filled out the rest of the ballot paper, and their vote gets thrown away because you need to number in the lower house. You need to number every square to do it. So I think that mistake is people make a mistake. That's a vote I should have had. But look, and people keep asking us, where will you put your preferences, as though it's some sort of secret. Remember, it was at a previous election that in the Senate, the preference deals were effectively secret.
Yes, that was a shocking thing.
That was terrible.
One of the good things that Malcolm Turnbull did was to get rid of that.
Yeah. So you might vote for the Libertarian Church Party or the Conservative Church Party, and found your vote went to the Sex Party because of all the secret preferences. You didn't really know where your vote would end up. Thankfully, that system is no longer in place. So the only person that allocates the preferences, remember, is the person with a pen in their hand. Well, the parties hand out a recommendation of how people should fill the ballot paper out and where they should put their preferences. That is just a recommendation. It's mainly done to make sure you remember to number every square. But ultimately, the only person that gives the preference is the person that marks the ballot paper. It is their decision and their decision alone. There's a lot of misinformation going about that, there's all these secret deals that the United Australia Party will do, and they have all these secret deals and will secretly get one party in ahead of the other. No. The person with a pen in hand is the only person that allocates a preference.
I want to now just raise another issue. I had a piece in Spectator about what I think is a national disgrace. It's in the current Spectator while we're speaking. And it's about the institution of electoral fraud. Fraud is a major problem in the Australian landscape. And it's not just what we assume to be the big fraud, that is multiple voting, because since the Hawke government, before the Hawke government, when I voted, I had to go to a school nearby. Yes. I could go nowhere else. Yes. That was my subdivision. Now I can go to about 20 or 30 places in my electorate and vote there. I could keep on voting in all of them. Of course, I don't. But the second thing is that what they have done is between the calling of the election and the closing of the rolls, there's about a week, and we know that in that week there is an enormous amount of fake enrolments. And I think this was demonstrated in the same-sex plebiscite, when the Bureau of Statistics, which was running the plebiscite, but which got the information from the Electoral Commission, received about 250,000 return to senders.
Yes.
That is, people weren't,
Yes,
they weren't there, and somebody in the building had eventually sent them back. There must have been many more, because I know in my building there are letters which keep on circulating because people don't know what to do with it, instead of just marking it RTS. Anyway, that 250,000 were not returned to the Electoral Commission. They were all destroyed. Now, I am sure, I would be amazed if the Bureau of Statistics didn't first ask the Electoral Commission, do you want these? We've got all of these, shall we send them back? I suspect the Electoral Commission said, no, just get rid of them. Because if they had destroyed them without consulting the Electoral Commission, surely the Electoral Commission would have been outraged and carried on. In other words, the Electoral Commission was not interested in correcting their role. Yes. So that in the next election, which was the 2019 election, presumably those names were still on the roll. Yes, yeah. And obviously what the fraudsters do, it's very easy to enrol a name because they're not checked.
That's right. And
so you just flood the Electoral Commission during that week. You obviously choose the marginal electorates. You don't do it in an electorate which is blue ribbon. And this must have an enormous impact, because some people lose their seats by a very small
Ewan Jones, who was a good mate, he was the member for Herbert, I think, in the 2016 election. He lost, I think, by 23 votes. 23 votes he lost his seat by. And there were many more than 23 multiple votes and stuff. So that system could have been. But it's also important to have, when you have the election result declared, you've got to know that that's pretty accurate. You hate to see a situation like in America, where the system is so lax, where ballot boxes turning up under tables. There was no proper.
And the scrutineers have been told to go home.
That's right. Yeah. There was no chain of custody. But even the scrutineers in America were like sitting in a chair 20 metres away. They would have needed to bring a pair of binoculars with them to see what was happening. Yeah. And people are feeding votes through machines. There was
one scene where the scrutineers, we saw it on television, scrutineers were sitting outside looking through a window, and they started pasting paper on the window so the scrutineers couldn't see what they were up to.
But what it does, that then undermines the legitimacy of the government that comes in. Now, whether they're correct or not, whether there's been fraud or not, you want the government to win. Okay, well, it was fair and fair. The situation happened in America where there was such slipshod methods that even if it's hard, we're a distance away, but the perception is there that there was fraud being undertaken, and that undermines the legitimacy of the next government that comes in.
I suppose you're supporting the ID bill.
Yes, yeah, I think yes. I always thought, and funny, I function use election with people actually come up and I was surprised. I didn't have to show my ID. People expect you have to show your ID, and what I find amazing in this, those arguing, oh no, you don't need your ID to go in and vote, they are saying, well, you need to have your ID and a government-issued passport and certificate to go and get your hair cut.
Yes.
Right?
In fact, when I voted in the municipal election, which was at the Bondi Surf Club, I had to log on with the QR at the entrance. But then when I went to vote, which was just inside the building,
nothing.
They didn't ask for any identity. The other thing is, why is there not an electronic roll? So when my name is ruled off, and I believe it's cost, this is governments pour billions of dollars down the drain.
It couldn't be that hard to have with the technology that you've got. Yes. That they could sit in there and all the booths in the electorate could be linked up. So if I go in and I vote as Craig Kelly, my name gets ticked off, and it gets ticked off in every one of the 40-something booths.
Like every credit card, which is linked, if you use your credit card anywhere, it's linked across the nation, and the credit card company knows that you've spent money. Yeah.
So how difficult that would be?
It's not difficult at all.
Just says, okay, it's one person, one vote, and you know people, and they're not saying, well, hang on, this result is questionable.
Now, I think, having said farewell earlier, I'll say farewell now, and thank you very much.